Hello everyone, my name is Holly and welcome back to the channel. It is time to wrap up all the books I read in the month of September and give you my reviews and star ratings for all of them. Now, I am very happy with how much I read last month. A total of 6 books, which is very good for me since I've barely been managing like 3 lately. So 3 of these books I loved and 3 I didn't love so much. So truly a balance of both good and bad. I'm just going to review them in the order that I read them. So I'm going to start with The Monsters We Defy. So I actually really like the title of this book more now having read it because it matches the story really well and makes sense. So I recommend this to people who want to read something fresh and different in the urban fantasy / paranormal genre. It was described to be a heist novel set in the 1950s, and that had me so intrigued, and I was really excited for all like the jazz integrations. So we are introduced to our main character, a young black woman named Clara, as she navigates her life in 1925 New York with the ability to see and communicate with ghosts and other spirits. So if you're interested in this book, this month would be actually the perfect time to pick this up because it definitely has like that fall and spooky feel to it. So Clara is indebted to the spirit world, but mainly to an entity called the Empress, who personally holds her debt. And this entity gives Clara an opportunity at freedom by tasking her to steal a magical ring from the richest woman in DC, which makes it a true heist story. It has a gathering friends for the mission trope, and they all have powers too, so they each have their own way of helping and also the reason for helping in the first place. It had a really great setting. That being said, I was really into this book the first 100 pages, super into the mystery. I was excited to see Clara save her community, her friends, and others who are being kidnapped. But the farther I got into the book, the more my interest dropped. I got to the middle and nothing was really happening quite yet. The plot hadn't advanced much, and then I got to the end and was left feeling really unsatisfied. I enjoyed the book enough to where I wasn't going to DNF it. I really want to know what was going to happen at the end, but I found it easy to put down when it was like time to go to bed or I needed to go do something, and that's typically when I can tell that I'm not loving the story. So while it wasn't like a full-on page turner for me, it was still a really nice read. I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars. So the next book I'm going to be talking about, as you can tell, I kind of had like books back to back. This is probably my most disappointing read of the month, and that was The Drowned Woods. You guys, I am so sad about this. This author's previous book, The Bone Houses, is one of my favorite YA books, which is one hell of a feat for my adult fantasy persona, but this was so surface level compared to that. The characters didn't grab me whatsoever. In fact, I think they were the biggest flaw in this book. It almost read like a sequel. The characters have a lot of history between each other already, and it feels like you missed out on a lot of important past scenes with them. So it's telling, not showing to the extreme. Everyone already had developed a drama with each other that you're just supposed to accept even though you saw none of it. Like, I thought the plot was going to be about this girl with water magic who is being controlled by the prince and has to escape and defeat him. And that's literally what the synopsis tells us, but that's already happened. That's not the plot we're experiencing. It's the aftermath that we are reading about. I felt so detached from everything. Like, I walked into the middle of a conversation and had no context. It's really sad when the dog companion felt like the best written thing in the whole book. The plot itself didn't grab me. The stakes, which if you've read this book fully, you know were supposed to be high, like life or death high, but they weren't. We were told so many times how terribly dangerous this prince is, who is looking for the main character, but we never meet him. I had about 50 pages left of this book and DNF'd it. Like, I quit reading it when the main twist was revealed and I just didn't care. So I'm just going to end it there and pretend this book didn't happen. And then things changed for me and I read Babel. So a little plug incoming. I did a whole video for this book, as most of us fantasy booktubers did, and I'll link that down below for you because I go way more in depth on my thoughts. It's kind of a vloggy style where I showed you my first impressions as I was reading it, so I'll keep this a little short. So in Babel, we move away from the rich fantasy scene that we're used to, aka the Poppy War series, and we move to a more urban 1800s England, but we still have that like familiar, well-developed and unique magic system, though it is lighter this time. It showcases the power of languages and communication. As someone who isn't on the same intelligence level of R.F. Kuang and never will be, this book made me sit and think for days after finishing it. Babel is honestly multiple stories melded into one, but the focus is a young academic with the opportunity to learn at Oxford, this prestigious school that's hundreds of years old, and it teaches the brightest people in the world. We follow Robin Swift from his beginnings in China through his entire time at Oxford and the events that take place there. And of course, it's not as simple as that, and it's not without its rage and anger. Babel was a fascinating read for me. There's so much knowledge woven in these stories and so much to discover that I would recommend this book to anyone with even just a faint adoration for languages. And all of it is fabricated in such an interesting and intricate way that you will get drawn in completely. One thing in particular I'd like to advise any future reader who decides to tackle Babel, because it is very large and in charge and intimidating, is to read the footnotes. I personally think they added so much more depth to the plot, the characters, the world. Don't ignore them and you'll thank me later. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. It's one of my favorite books of the year. It surprised me in a way that I knew going into it wasn't going to be an epic fantasy, and I still ended up loving it. I mean, of course I did. It's R.F. Kuang. No surprise. The Vicious Circle. This was a totally random book I started reading on my phone while waiting for Darren's car to get a tire rotation and an oil change. It was a 2-hour wait. The car dealership wasn't near anything, so we couldn't just walk somewhere else. So I did the only thing I could do because I didn't bring a book with me. I'm smart. I started a book on my phone, and this cover called to me. I knew nothing about it, just started reading it, and I read almost 100 pages while sitting there. I really enjoyed it. So I just kept reading it even after I got home. It was my official read. This is a cult mystery that takes place at this wellness center in the middle of the jungle. Our main character, Svita, I'm gonna say Svita, that sounds better, is a former model living in New York, engaged to a man whose family doesn't like her, which is all sorts of drama on its own, and it's very frustrating to witness. Well, Svita finds out her estranged uncle has died and left her his $180 million inheritance, plus his huge manor house compound thing that is in the middle of the Guatemala jungle, which she has to travel to for his funeral and to acquire his birth certificate. But her uncle had a wife who is very strange, and she seems to have taken over his estate with quite a group of people who worship her. This book surprised the hell out of me. It was a very dark mystery where the characters are basically locked inside one place to snoop and suss out everything. I loved the environment, the details about the exotic animals and foliage, the gilded mansion. I could picture it all in my head, and it made the cult story all the more unique for me. I'm always fascinated by the charismatic leaders who twist religious teachings to manipulate their flock, and I thought those aspects of the story were really interesting. It's been a while since a book like this hooked me from the beginning, and this truly did. It was twisty, filled with lies and deceit. You have no idea who to trust. Romance-wise, though, I didn't care for. There is a slight, very small love triangle happening that kind of gets in the way of things, but it wasn't too bad. It could have been worse. I give this 4 out of 5 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I may have to check out this author's other books. And here's when I realized, man, I must be in a weird mystery kick, because I read another mystery novel, and that was Lavender House. It's another book I read on a total whim based on the cover, plus it sounded really interesting after finding out more about it, and reading the introduction really solidified my choice. It only took me 2 days to read this. It is fairly short, which helps, plus it's a very easy read writing-wise. It's really beautifully simple. It gets the point across, which is why I felt like it was a very fast read. This is essentially a whodunit mystery with social commentary about how scary it was to be queer in the 50s. So we have this 1950s setting. We follow Andy, who has just been thrown off the police force after being caught with another man. While sitting at a bar, he's approached by a woman who asks him to investigate the suspicious death of her wife. Andy accepts the job and moves into Lavender House, this like luxurious estate, and there he opens up an investigation. The book describes discrimination, hate, and pain that queer people had to and still have to face. Is very raw, and all sorts of different issues are explored, and this house gives these characters a free will to be themselves. And the cast is full of very complex, interesting characters who all have complicated relationships with one another, and that for me kept the story interesting while I started to slip for the mystery itself a little bit. I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. It's still hard to pinpoint exactly why I didn't love it fully, but I do recommend this for anyone who's looking for a light, cozy mystery because it isn't dark or bloody or anything like that, and maybe I was hoping for more of a twisted one. Now, the final book that I read, which was my favorite book of the month, I think, even above Babel, which is shocking, but it just fed my epic fantasy loving soul, and that was Ruination. So this is the very first full-length League of Legends based novel. If you have no idea, League of Legends is a very, very popular video game, and also there's a TV show called Arcane that was very, very popular. Everyone loved it. This is set in that world. I want to make it very clear that you do not have to know anything about League of Legends to enjoy this book. This book read and is written like a standalone fantasy novel, which is great. I was really worried about that, like, oh man, I really want to recommend this book, but like, can I recommend it to anyone who's never played or watched anything League of Legends? And you absolutely can. Maybe someone will think differently because I did see a bad review of this book saying like they were absolutely confused because they didn't know any knowledge of League of Legends, but I just have to highly disagree with that. We're introduced to a couple characters at the beginning. We have Callista, who is a warrior general, and Vigo, or her uncle, but she's kind of like an older sister to him because he is very young. He's being coronated as king, and Callista advises him. She made a promise to make sure he makes a good, honorable king. Well, at the very beginning, we see this big battle, and it's Vigo's army. They win, and they are at a feast to celebrate their victory. Unfortunately, there are assassins at this feast, and they have these strange magical daggers, and one of them nicks the queen, so Vigo's wife, and she becomes extremely ill, literally lying on her deathbed. They think she has very a small amount of time left, and Vigo loves her dearly, and he will do anything to try and save her life, and he is so desperate enough that he decides to send Callista to a mythical, legendary island that no one has seen before. No one thinks it exists, but apparently there is a cure that could save his wife. So that's her quest. Find this mythical island and find the cure that might not even exist either. This book was just so freaking good. I did not expect to love it. Like a League of Legends novel, are you kidding me? Why would I love that? But I really truly did. The court politics are just as deadly as like the fight scenes in this book. I think it was just such a good balance of amazing lovable characters. Like, I loved every single character in this book. I loved Vigo, even though he had a bit of an ego on him, but he's young and I don't know, he's like impressionable. I can't help but love him. And Callista herself, if you were looking for a strong, independent female lead, this book is definitely for you. She's definitely a character who is smart and is also very cautious, so you don't have a dumb main character who just charges into things that you know will probably kill them. She thinks before she speaks. She thinks before she takes a step forward, and it was a really nice, refreshing change. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars, and I still can't believe that I liked this book as much as I did. Alrighty, so those are all the books that I read in September. I'm very happy with what I read, even though a couple of them were very disappointing, but at least I found some 5-star favorites, which can be rare for me. So tell me down below what books that you read in September, because I would love to know what was the best book you read, and tell me in the comments. Like this video, it really helps me out. Subscribe if you haven't. I upload videos every single week, and until we meet again, happy reading.